Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is probably the most famous work, not just the most famous symphony in the history of Western music. Part of this fame, I think, has to do with the symphony before Beethoven's time. With several important exceptions, and we can think of the great classics by Haydn and Mozart, but the symphony tended to be something of a curtain raiser. It involved a longish first movement, often with a slow introduction, and then that first movement was followed by progressively lighter movements, a fleet-footed and often humorous scherzo, a slow movement, and a cheerful, light finale to send everybody home in a good mood. So in the Ninth Symphony, what do we actually hear? In the first movement, everything is murky. It's a haze in which the listener can't quite make out basics such as meter or key. The first movement is very powerful and questioning, and it's filled with the heaven-storming Beethoven, much associated with the composer's heroic style. Then the second movement, the scherzo, will be familiar to listeners of a certain age. It was used to announce the Huntley and Brinkley news report. Keith Olbermann later used a rather undistinguished and watered-down version of the scherzo from Beethoven 9. The third movement, the Adagio molto e cantabile, is a series of profoundly moving variations. Yet, unlike Beethoven's symphonic models, the ninth is weighted towards the end. The fourth movement begins with a shrieking dissonance, after which Beethoven proceeds to recall all three earlier movements, and all of this prepares us for the bass soloist's first utterance: "Friends, not these tones. O Freunde, nicht diese Tönen." Let us instead sing of joy. And don't forget, it's a pretty big deal to have a symphonic work in which an entire chorus and four soloists suddenly show up in the middle of the orchestra. So by the time Richard Strauss comes along, many composers were modeling symphonies on Beethoven's Ninth. That is, they composed symphonies that trace a progression from darkness or uncertainty to light. Or if you were Gustav Mahler, you composed a symphony with a chorus in the last movement, just as he did in his Second Symphony of 1894. Some composers, however, thought that the symphony was getting a little old hat, and they thought that even instrumental music should deal more explicitly and more directly with things of this world, with emotions, people, things, perhaps even literature. One of these composers was Richard Strauss, who in 1889 composed Don Juan. It's known as a tone poem, and it's one of many variations on the 16th century story of Don Juan, who was probably the most famous womanizer in history. Mozart was similarly inspired in his Don Giovanni. As a romantic composer, Strauss had read and been moved by a version of the Don Juan story by the German poet Nikolaus von Lenau, in which Don Juan is brooding and contemplative. He searches for a love that he could never hope to find, and he ends up letting himself get killed. So, in Strauss's version, Don Juan is a tragic hero. He's not just a womanizer out for a good time. Although I think we could say that he does have some good times. So all the while the drama unfolds with Strauss depicting Don Juan's sexual energies, his conquests, and his ultimate demise. So with this piece, with its poetic effusions and its accessible storyline, was enthusiastically applauded at its premiere, and it definitively established Strauss as a composer of the future.